Hi 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. In this episode, I am joined by Brad Loomis and Jeff Alberts as we discuss the art of coaching part 2. We went over this in episode 2 actually, as far as the considerations that we deal with and recognize as coaches, and in this episode we go into the ways that we take those decisions that we make and deliver them to our athletes. How do we make ourselves pliable? How do we utilize our skills in being flexible and delivering the same message to different athletes? How do we develop those skills as coaches, and how have we learned from the past? What do we actively do to continue growing? And how do we advise that younger coaches or newer coaches gain experience in similar things? So if you enjoyed that conversation in episode 2, which I know many of you guys did, it's one of our most popular episodes so far, then stick around. I think you guys will find this one enlightening as well, as we hear many, many stories. So here is the Art of Coaching Part 2, all about the delivery with Brad Loomis and Jeff Alberts. So friends, okay, in episode 2, which was titled The Art of Coaching, we kind of talked about a whole lot of factors that come into our decision making with how we work with our athletes. And then today, more specifically, we want to break that down and basically, all right, we have our athletes, we know what we want to do with them, we know what the goal is, we know who they are now, and because of that, how do we change our delivery? How are we able to get our message across to different people who may not always be in the same population or the same gender or the same nationality and things of that nature? And I think that, there is the art of coaching as a whole, and then there is the specifics, and I think the delivery is just as important as the decision-making factor. So we're going to go into that together today. Now, Jeff, you, as we all know, being the godfather, you are not always you're a little bit older than some of the youngest athletes that you're getting. So how many people would you say that you get on your roster, I guess the majority that are under, say, 25 years old?
Quite a bit. I would
half?
say at least half.
Really?
At least half.
Okay.
At certain points, depends. So yeah, it makes me kind of feel old knowing that I've trained a lot longer than they've been on planet Earth. So yeah.
This is true. How do you find yourself, I don't want to say dealing with that because that's too broad. Is there a certain place that you have to go mentally? Do you say okay, these kids are young, I'm going to think about a way to say this to them that's hip and new? Or are you a way that speaks to them? Do you think in a way that they'll understand, or kind of a combination of all of that when you are delivering an adjustment or a principle or something?
I think generally, because we're speaking ages here, just broad, it'd be, okay, I need to make sure that I put myself back when I was in my early 20s, and how my thought process was and where my maturity level was. So it's if I'm coming at them from the maturity level I am now, an older guy, sometimes it could come across as too fatherly figure,
Okay. Yeah.
I don't want to listen to my dad, So it's you kind of have to get back on that level of when I was a young guy. And at times I have to kind of come across as more understanding of that level. Of course, with the same intent, the same instructions I want to give them, just like you were talking about, delivered on that kind of a level. But it depends on the person, though, because there's some people that are young like that are very mature, and then there's other ones that not so much. So you might have to deliver in different ways according to that, too.
Because even then, too, when you think about kids, and when we say kids, not to degrade or demean them, but when we say kids, young 20s, there are some younger adults that really respond to a fatherly figure, and then some that straight rebel against it, right? So it's two different levels. So you're okay, how do I relate to a younger person? And then within that, is this younger person receptive to authority? Do they rebel against it? That's a good point. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, because some people, they want to hear that. They rather just maybe straight up front, honest, in their face, tell it how it is, and they could run with it. But then maybe some people they get kind of offended or for lack of a better term, butt hurt, so you kind of have to make sure you're delivering in a way where the message is it gets across in a good way, and
Yeah.
that athlete can take it and run with it and excel with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where communication comes into play and getting to know your athletes.
Yeah. And my favorite thing too is like, okay, so I know that that's one of the things that you really stressed with, or that I've learned a lot from you, is you saying like the iron helps me relate to younger people who otherwise I wouldn't be able to. And then a super cool thing I think about you, Brad, that I think you've had the most females on your roster for a while, right?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, I still have a fair share. Yeah.
Yeah, and do you find, like when we say with the younger humans that they, you have to see how they deal with like authority and not being their dad or whatever, do you feel like like some tactics that you feel like are more effective when talking to a female versus a male competitor?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. A lot of times with male competitors, it's kind of like dudes in the locker room. You can just pretty much tell a dude, you're slacking. You need to suck it up here,
Yeah.
And usually that's well received. Usually that's pretty well received, and they'll be like, gosh, you know what? Right. You're right, coach. I probably could have just, done 7/8 of the workout, and usually they're pretty good about receiving that.
Uh-huh.
I don't know that I've ever used that terminology, for any female, and that's kind of getting back to that art of coaching and being more specific, is that you have to. A lot of times anymore, I kind of use your approach. I'll kind of ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I'll kind of say, was there a better way to do that? Could you have done maybe just a little bit more? Could you have done, something different? What could we have done to make this better?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of things like that, and kind of probe questions. And if I know that the person is not very, they're just not, they don't communicate real well.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say, okay, you know what, this is what we could have done better. Instead of just saying, look, you're
being a pansy.
This is what we could have done.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes just little things like that, will totally, it'll open up those doors and not shut communication down.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing too. I'm glad that that's not like my thing only, but I love, that's kind of the reason why I will do Skype calls, is when, because week to week we do they report to us, we report to them, they report to us, we report to them. And then sometimes if it's like, I need to ask those questions, not because I necessarily need to know the answer, but more because I need to hear them come to turn, like, again, ask them, why did you do that? What did, I need to almost, not interrogate in a bad way, but interview them to the point where they can come to, I guess, what they needed to, but on their own rather than me shoving it down their throat. And most of the time, and most of the time it's sensible, but that's why I would say every 8 to 12 weeks, probably every one of my athletes, I'll Skype them just as like a, hey, what's up? How's it going? But tell me how you really feel. And that's either with someone who maybe we're between programs and they started, you can tell they're getting stale because their numbers, like if I give them a lot of RPE freedom, I feel like sometimes the deeper they get in the prep, they, like you said, they kind of are like not taking advantage of it, but not going there.
Yes, the energy levels come down. You get more, you're tired, lethargic, like, oh, 8 RP8, okay, that felt like an RP. No, that's an RP6. You need to get after it.
Yeah, so it's like I have to do that call and be like, your numbers are going down. How do you feel about that? Really? Do you think that? Why, And then they come to the whole, and I think it's also just motivating too to talk to the coach sometimes. I find like there's always a new like sense of vigor from the athlete when I'm able to, even like a 20-minute Skype call, just something to check in with them. But
can I talk?
And a lot of times I think. Oh, go ahead, Jeff. No, you're.
I'll say I have a good scenario because I know people like to hear about when we make calls, how we make calls, and that type of stuff, and how you deliver it. Yeah. So report today, athletes just not adhering, too well. It's just like maybe adherence is like maybe 80%, 85%, progress is like could be a heck of a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
And this is someone who's been on my roster for a while, so I'm really comfortable with like smacking him, okay, this is what he needs to be done.
Yeah.
But if this was like in the first month, let's say, I'm not going to come at this person pretty hard.
Yeah.
So it's just like, okay, now today it's just like, man, I need 90% execution from you, because I don't expect perfection, but I expect progress, and going from 80 to 90 is a big step up.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like Mike Ditka today, like, it's not, and I'm not saying, I'm not coming at you because I'm angry. I'm coming at you because there's potential. You're not fulfilling it, and it's my job to get that out of you. So if I just keep telling you every week, yeah, it's okay,
Yeah.
keep getting your 80, 85. Well, that's what you're going to get. You're only going to get 85. So, okay, we'll get 90. So I say, okay, next week I want 90. On that spreadsheet, I better see 90.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't get 90, then I'm going to be pissed off. Because it's like you're spending money on a coach. Why are you spending money on a coach if you're not doing your part? That's the thing.
Right.
So just like in the first month, there's no way I would have told this person that.
Right.
I would have been like, okay, 85, 80 is good. Okay, let's see if we can get 80 and a half, 81, because it's, or, just deliver the message in a more easy way to where I'm not possibly going to offend this person. Because in the first month, if I would have said, hey, I need 90%, you're not doing your end, and get on their ass, well, guess what? They're probably either going to get discouraged, quit, or they're going to end up firing the coach.
Yeah.
And that's not really building a good, trusting relationship.
Yeah, I think what's important is you said I was Mike Ditka, right? And I think that's, and on certain days you gotta be Lombardi, and on Sunday, like, you have to. I think we are different coaches, at different times. Like any day, I could, I can be. I'm always me, but I need to understand that people don't need the same me. You
need to customize your delivery.
Yeah, and it could be three people that all, if I have three people, one's, a mom that's like 55, and one's a 19-year-old dude, and one's like a single lady hustling with a career. Like, if all of them had lack of adherence, it would need to be delivered in a different way. And also, not just a different way because their life situations are different, but like, if that single person that's super stressed out, maybe her lack of adherence is because, like, I need to give her more food till she doesn't stress out so much and whatever. And then you have this mom who's just like, her kids came in town and she just felt like making them dinner and ate all of it too. And it's like, well, then that's a different issue because that was a choice. And this young kid, like, so it's all, I think it's just, I want to, go ahead.
Always context to every situation.
Yeah, so it's not just that they're different people. It's that because they're different people and have different life situations. Yeah, because at the same token, there could be a 19-year-old dude and a 55-year-old female that need to hear the same talk because they didn't adhere because it was Christmas or whatever, and they took Christmas as like a week or something on accident. So I think that's important. Are there any, like, I know, Jeff, you read John Wooden a lot. Wooden, however you want to say it.
Wooden.
UCLA? Is that bad? That was right, isn't it?
UCLA's the main one. Yeah. I'm not sure to the extent of how many teams he coached prior to that.
But regardless of that, like that, I know that you've said multiple times that he was a really big inspiration for you learning how to coach.
Yeah. Because basically a lot of it's common sense. And a lot of it's how you coach people, not so per se numbers.
Right.
And getting the most, finding ways to get the most out of people. And he was a disciplinarian. He wasn't a softie,
Yeah.
He wasn't a yeller or screamer, but when he addressed players and all that, it was in a way where, people can relate and understand. It's like, okay, I don't want to disappoint coach. I need to get the most out of this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like I read where like players had to have their shoes tied certain ways. They had to dress accordingly. Like, you don't show up to practice or games looking sloppy. You had to be, tidy,
Right. And
So it's
that
kind of like,
carries over into so
crossing your
many
T's, dotting your
things.
I's.
Yeah, it carries over into
Hmm.
so many things. Brad, do you have any specific like person or resource or whatever that you feel like has really either helped you with coaching or helped you with people?
Not nothing specific, to be honest with you. In fact, somebody asked me that the other day, and I just Googled John Wooden, and I didn't even realize he's authored a ton of books.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of information out there. He's kind of regarded as like the coach of coaches. But I mean, I'll be honest with you. Most of the resources that I've used have been you guys. Because up until I did start coaching, I think I kind of went over this when you and I Skype together, Andrea. That a lot of people have just told me, you're kind of a natural at this. You just have an innate way of putting the context of whatever it is that you're trying to coach into the person's language. You know what I mean? And so I guess I can read people pretty good that way, and I can kind of, figure out what it is that they speak or what language it is that they speak. But then fine tuning it, has just been more so from you guys, from Jeff and from Eric and Berto and more so you here recently, Andrea, just because you've brought a whole new set of tools kind of to the workbench that I've utilized quite a bit.
I think that okay, so I've been coaching probably just as long as y'all have, just because I started when I was like 16. So even though y'all are much older than me, I just started really early coaching like gymnastics classes, right? And I think that it's not just the amount of time, but I really accredit a lot of my ability to deal with humans from that time, because they were just the people I had to deal with were just such opposites. Like it was, okay, motivate a child and teach them how to do things and teach them how to be respectful, because you have a bunch of them running around. But at the same time, it was like there's parents too that want to know, like, well, why isn't my kid doing da da da? And it was like I was a 16-year-old with like a 45-year-old woman yelling at me like, why isn't my kid in level 5 yet? Well, I'm like, I don't, and so I just think, like you said, it came naturally to you, but at the same time, it's like our upbringings too contribute a lot. Like I know, Jeff, you said your parents, obviously I had parents too, but it was like the fast track to learning how to deal with people was learning kids and adults when I was like an upper age adolescent kind of thing.
So for me, growing, like when I learn something, I'm better at like actually doing it versus someone telling me. Like I recall, like my stepdad was pretty rough, so it's like he was trying to teach me how to change the bag on the lawnmower. I was like learning how to mow the lawns and all that, and I'm trying to do it on my own, and I wasn't getting it, and I'm asking him, and he was not going over there and physically showing me. He's just saying, figure it out, do it, like literally, like kind of just yelling, and it was like it made me like curl up into a ball. So I know that like that approach with some people, like as a kid, I was pretty timid, you would say, not overly aggressive or anything. So that was like that approach kind of just made me curl up, and I lost confidence. It's like I don't want to. I just told him I ain't doing this, and of course he got more mad because I wasn't going to do it. But he yelled at me more because I'm like rebelling. So whereas so that was kind of his way of kind of like in your face, like that was 24/7. So that doesn't work with everybody. And then my mom, I was like total opposite. She would like, okay, this is how you do it, honey, and da da da, and show me. So she was like a big softie. So it's just I think that's where I'm kind of learning, like the way I was raised. My mom taught me to be respectful, treat everybody with respect, the same, be humble, all that kind of stuff. And then my dad, my real dad, he's kind of like same type of way, like really respectful. Like you make sure you hold the doors open for the ladies, all these type of things. So that's where all that comes from. And I think because of that, it's easy for me to relate to a lot of different people. Like there's not too many people where I can't get along with in real life. On occasion, there's like some people I just like, man, these people are assholes. But
you can deal with them.
For the most part, I say 95% of the time I'm getting along with everybody.
Yeah. And I think with both of y'all, like Brad, you do this a lot. Like we'll be having a conversation. You're like, I like what you said there, Andrea, because da 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 da, or Eric or whoever. And I think when you say, I don't know, I just naturally feel like I can coach, I think it's because you're such a good listener and observer. You know what I mean? Like I know I talk a lot and I interrupt people a lot, and I think that's one of my, although I know I get excited and it's like one of the things that makes me great or whatever, but it's also detrimental. Like I have to listen. I've trained myself to be a better listener, which I think helps me deal with people. Like if I can see a situation, and if I see two people like in an argument and I'm like, they're just going at each other and I'm like, oh, I see what the problem is here. You know what I mean? Like I like taking, that's like a form of practicing that I feel like makes me a better coach too, is like if I can see how someone reacts to things, like mentally note that, or physically. Sometimes I'll write notes about the athlete or whatever if they're doing something crazy in response to something that I did. But I think that might be one of your strengths too, is I think you've always, like anytime we have group talks, you're like, yeah, right now you just kind of sit back and listen for a while and then you come in, and so I think maybe that's one of the strengths that you bring.
Yeah, and that was, I didn't really even realize that, because it's just kind of, that's what I do. That's kind of how I operate. But one of Jeff's athletes gave us some really good feedback when we were over in London. And he said, he says, when you ask Brad a question, he like pulls you aside and like just sits there and like looks you in the eye with his 100% attention, And yeah, I don't know why I do that, and I didn't never really even realize, that's kind of what I do. But yeah, and a lot of times you can pick up things. I mean, first of all, I really have to pay attention anyway because I'll miss things if I don't. But you can just pick up on so many.
That's because you're middle-aged, Brad. That's why.
But yeah, you'll pick up on a lot of cues sometimes, and that's sometimes why I will almost insist from people that you give me a video check-in, next week, please, and one thing I was going to touch on earlier, Andrea, how you said you like to kind of Skype with your folks, every so often. Really, to be honest with you, we love really coachable people. We love those people that we can just tell them what to do and they run with it. But at the same time, that's a lot of responsibility. In my opinion, coaching a coachable person is almost kind of more responsibility, inherent, I guess, responsibility than the person that's not very coachable, because that person is going to take what you tell them to do and they're just going to run with it. They're going to do it, and they're going to do it to the letter. And could you imagine if you gave that kind of person flawed advice, or just kind of winged something, for lack of a better term? That's kind of scary to me. That you could potentially give somebody the kind of advice that could do them, harm or damage.
Yeah.
And those are the folks that I like to Skype with a little bit more often, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I'll just kind of say, you know what, let's get together next week. I want you to write me a list of 5 questions, and I just want you to just, open it up. Whatever it is, 5 open questions, And that's a tool that I think is almost mandatory for that really coachable person, that is just going to run with whatever you tell them to do.
Go ahead, Jeff.
It obviously makes our job easy because you just give directions and they run. But at the same time, it doesn't make us a better coach because it doesn't challenge us. For me, I think I've learned, like the athletes that I've had where they really challenge me and ask a lot of questions, and not challenge me as in like, okay, I don't like the calls you're making, but more just like the whys and, even offering their own maybe advice and maybe what they would want to do. And that way you could work with that athlete. I've learned more as a coach in that capacity because some athletes have challenged me to where I'm like, oh shit, I don't even know this answer. He's asked, I have to go research it, or I have to ask maybe an Eric Helms or an Alberto Nunez for an answer and then I become better as a coach because of that. I have one athlete on my roster now. I've been working with them for probably a little over a year or so. And the guy's smarter than I am. He knows more about the body than I do. But so you combine his knowledge with my experience, and we've been able to have some really good, lengthy conversations, and we've both grown from it. So to me, those are like the clients that you do want, the athletes that you do want, that who will challenge and ask the whys and the hows, and and there I have had some guys on my roster that are they're the followers. You give them directions, they run with it. I have one guy right now. He's in prep, and the guy is a machine. You give him directions, he executes it. I literally 99% of the time, the dude's shredded out of his mind. He's an awesome athlete. But and he's not just one who talks a lot. I say, how you doing? Got questions? Just
I'm good.
Everything's good. Gave me the orders. Let me run with it. So sometimes you just got to say, okay, you know what? That's how they are, and that's what he wants and needs. So you deliver.
Yeah, and I think that's important when you're saying like what they want or need, because Brad, you said sometime when someone's really coachable, you said, and they just do what they need to do, and I find that there's a middle ground. I find that that's almost less coachable, because that's me, like you said, kind of blindly throwing stuff out there. It might not be that it's bad advice, but with someone who's a big talker, like say I give this certain program out and maybe halfway through it they're dying or whatever, but I just don't know that. It's still a good program, but for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe they got injured and didn't tell me, or maybe they, so I almost would like to argue that's the person that's like the yes ma'am, got it, it's all good, everything's good, isn't necessarily the ideal place to be in. So when I do this myself, y'all remember 6 months ago, I was like, that's how my shoulder has been injured for 6 months now, is because I wanted so bad. I got this new sport. I got this new coach. I wanted so badly to please him. And so I just said, yep, whatever's on my sheet, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Monday, my shoulder hurts it's okay. Tuesday, it kind of hurts. Wednesday, it kind of hurts. So then by Saturday, I'm like giving him a video of me like almost in tears, being like, okay, this has been hurting for a week. I can't do this, blah, blah, blah. The first text I get back was, why didn't you tell me on Monday? And I'm just like, I'm such an idiot,
Yeah.
But that doesn't, and I'm over here thinking I'm being the good kid, that I'm just doing what was asked, where he's like, I should have known Monday, and I'm like, fuck.
So this is my thoughts on kind of that is like an experienced coach knows things like in a prep, like if an athlete is saying everything's great, but they're at 7% body fat and it's in a digging phase, we're trying to get to 6%. Then I know damn well that shit's not easy, and I don't care who you are. Yeah. And if you're coming back saying I'm fine, there might be a breaking point somewhere along the line. So I'll question them out the yin yang. Mm-hmm. No, I kind of have a feeling you're not feeling fine, and I've gone through this so many preps. I know at this point, this is usually what kind of happens. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times, when I make an adjustment, I'm explaining, okay, if I'm lowering down food or adding carb, okay. First couple of days, you might be, oh, yeah, this is okay, I can do it. But then that third or fourth day hits, and all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh, shit, this is hard. So you're going to expect these things. But if they come back a week later, oh, I'm fine. Yeah. Then you kind of have to. I'm like, So it raises questions.
Yeah. And I think one of the, like in my presentation that I gave at SBS, like one of the things that I feel like is our job to deliver is to manage expectations. And like I said, then I try to stay like a month ahead, but it's like, okay, but for your first show, this is what we can expect. But okay, like for this next 6 months. And then a month from that show, all right, I want you to watch this video on how our recovery diet's going to go, which isn't going to start for another 4 weeks, but just watch it so you know before you're in the middle of it. Okay, peak weeks or show weeks coming. Here's your protocol for that week, 2.5 weeks early, so that you kind of know what's ahead. Because just like me being like, I got it, there's a lot of people that they don't realize they don't have it till, like you said, Jeff, till they're like fall apart, till they break, till they binge, till they whatever. And so it's not just how we deliver the instructions for the week. It's like looking ahead for them and making sure that they're prepared and hopefully answering the questions they don't know they have beforehand.
Yeah. And you kind of get a sense as to that person's personality along the way. So you kind of, how am I going to deliver the instruction, the pre-instructions, you know.
Yeah.
Am I going to be a Ditka, or am I going to be, you know, John Wood and be a little bit more tame when I tell them and things like that. So
yeah, and also when you deliver that information too, you know, because there are those people that are planners, you know, and they want to know ahead of time, like a week or two, you know, and so those are the people. It's like, okay, you know, here's the plan, you know, and then there's those folks that you want to prepare them for how they're going to feel, you know, during this time period. You know, the first 4 or 5 days is going to be great. Day 6 through 14 is going to suck. You know, I want you to know that now, you know. And then there's those other people that are just kind of like, well, you know what? I want you to check back in with me during this 6 to 14 day period, because, you know, that's kind of like, I don't want them to know about that yet. You know what I mean? And once they're there, then we'll kind of say, okay, this is normal. So you almost have to kind of know your client enough to know when to deliver, you know, the right kind of information and the right kind of instructions, you know?
Yeah. And I think too, a mistake that I think a lot of young, or not even a young, it is an age, but not as experienced coaches and trainers make is delivering promises early. Like, I think that when people say like, well, can I lose this much weight in 6 months? And you're like, well, I always say like, theoretically, that's absolutely possible, but I can't tell you that. You know what I mean? Because you don't know. You don't know if they can't adhere. You don't know if there's a death in the family. You don't know if there's a vacation that ruins the whole thing. Yeah. You don't know, you know, and then there's nothing worse than someone being angry and like, well, you said I could. It's like, well, we said we'd try and that it's possible. But there's definitely a difference, and it's always better to underpromise, over-deliver than it is to get people on your roster because I can get you shredded in 12 weeks. So it's like, can you though? Yeah. Because not everybody.
I never guarantee results.
Yeah.
Ever. Like, there's no crystal ball, you know?
Yeah.
This person might respond, great, yeah, they get peeled in 12 weeks. Okay. But then he may not, or she may not. It might take 36 weeks. There might be all these different scenarios that come up. You know, life happens, shit happens.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, there's always the programming on paper, and then there's always the adjustments that need to be made along the way.
Right.
Because I think a lot of this is probably getting off topic, but we're talking like the generalizations that we see out there in the fitness industry. Like you put a video out, it's generalized, but not everybody's going to fall under that generalization. Like often they're not, and then that's where a coach comes into play, or that individual comes into play to make the sound adjustments to tailor to that person.
Yeah.
And I just can't, like, starting with an athlete on day one, I just can't predict how they're going to respond and what adjustments we're going to need. Because there's, like Brad was saying, there's some people that they want a plan, like they want every single week mapped out. I'm like, how am I supposed to know what's going to happen in week 20 in a prep? You know, we're only on day one. Let's get through the first week and then go from there. So and that's where insecurities too come into play, and then their personality. So that's where you start learning people's personalities. Once you start going through and these different situations come up, are they calm and collected through it, or are they a freaked out, stressed out mess? And then that's where I figure out, okay, how am I going to approach this person on a week-to-week basis with all the different scenarios that are going to pop up?
Right.
I've had athletes that, you know, we're talking about different personalities and cultures. You know, the Mexican culture, you know, it's like they like to go over Nana's house and eat. I've had plenty of, you know, Mexican people that I've coached, and it's like those things have come up, and thankfully my wife's Mexican, she's in the culture, so I can coach them because I've experienced it myself. So these are the types of things that experience comes into play. Could you imagine if I was a 20-year-old coach with no life experience at all, and hey coach, I got this party, you know, this Nana's gonna be pissed off if I don't eat a tamale, what do I do? And I'm like, no, you don't fucking eat shit. Do not eat a tamale.
I know, and you know how serious it is now. You know how serious it is when we go to grandma's and they say tamales, you're like, okay, I'll have one. Like, you have to. It's offensive if you don't.
Yeah,
sometimes.
So these are just some of the situations that pop. There's a ton of situations that pop up. And in my eyes, we talk science all day long. It's very important, but to me,
Yeah.
it's like experience is just as, or if not more important.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, one of my, it sounds weird that it's my favorite things. One of my favorite things though, is when someone, like you said, you like when athletes challenge you or whatever. Like I'll have people that are decently well educated, you know, and they'll ask like, they'll ask if they can go this route that sounds on paper or in a book or in a paper, like a scientific paper or a magazine article, or, you know, wherever they found it, it makes sense. It's not absurd for them to try this technique. And I get to talk them out of that science, which does say that, because their personality has shown me that that's not the best decision for them, or our history together has shown me. And then they can be like, well, that makes sense. Yeah. And I like, again, not just the challenge of like me having to look stuff up for them, but I like when I can do for them what Berto has done for me, when it was like, but this is optimal. And he's like, it might be, but not for you right now. And this is why, you know, and there's been, you know, I remember whenever I was like a year out of season, I was heavier than I wanted to be. And I was doing tons of cardio whenever I was crying to you and Bert that one day after the mayhem in like 2014 or whatever. And I think it was like that week or the next week, I was going to start prepping a long, extended, small, like weight loss, a really slow weight loss for a powerlifting competition. And he was like, but before we do this, like, I want you to cut your cardio in half, and then I want you to spend the weekend with Brandon and go out and eat a couple times. I was like, what? You know, but that's
right.
what I need, because y'all know that I freaked the fuck out. And it was basically him. That was the only, unless my coach ordered it, I couldn't calm down.
Yeah.
You know, and that's him just knowing
he had
me.
He had to challenge you and take you out of your comfort zone in order for you to grow.
Yeah. And I
like if you just said, oh, okay, yeah, go ahead and we'll just run with more cardio and just kind of cater to what you wanted to do in that situation, you would still be stuck in that same rut.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I love it now, but at the time I was like, I'm going to get huge. And he was like, and nothing happened, you know, it's just, that's the kind of shit that you can't read that in a book.
He read he knows your personality.
Yeah.
And he delivered a way where it made you feel you were uncomfortable, but comfortable at the same time. Correct?
Right. Well, I'm uncomfortable because again, with a master's degree in ex-phys, I would never do that to myself. But I also not just had known him for a couple years in person at this point as a coach, but I did my due diligence before hiring him, knowing that, you know, I was seeing all his videos for the years before that, and then knowing him for a couple years, I wouldn't have hired him if I didn't already trust him.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that, like you said, there's conversations that after a year now you could have had with that client being like, hey, get your ass in gear, that you can't. It's not just your delivery that mattered, it's the amount of time that you spent prior to that developing trust. And that's intentional.
Yeah.
And
it's the timing.
Yeah.
There's timing involved too. I think too, like often we get people who may see us on social media, YouTube or whatever, and they think they know us.
Yeah.
And they, I want to work with Brad, or I want to work with Jeff or Berto because of this, you know, because I watch his YouTube videos or whatever. There's probably a handful of times where Eric has said, no, I'm not working with this person. I'm going to send them to Jeff or Brad because this guy is thinking all I'm going to do is talk science with him. And it's like, no, you didn't need all this stuff. You know, so a lot of it comes down to common sense. So actually doing that at times kind of helps people. So you think you're gelling with a certain person, but you're the total opposite. You actually grow and learn more from someone who's completely opposite. Like I've probably calmed this shit down on a lot of athletes who are just, they get paralyzed because they analyze so much.
Yeah.
So here's Jeff, the guy who doesn't really put too much stock in numbers, and I'm more chill. So it kind of helps that person, and vice versa. You know, maybe there's a too relaxed person, like, okay, that's probably not a good fit for Jeff right now. I think let's give him someone who's more detail oriented or more number oriented, like Brad is, or maybe like Eric. You know, so that I think
that's a good point though, because I should say that too. Like when I say I watched Berto's videos, I knew he was for me. It wasn't so much that, it was more like if it was like Berto was like, hey, I can't take you, but Brad can, I would have been like, perfect, because again, I just watched the 3D message was there, and I know that it's a holistic message that's well thought out and personal. Like, I just knew that the team, like, it wasn't like I would have signed up for something that I'd never consumed any of y'all's content or didn't have confidence in the way that I would be handled, I guess, more so than like Bert's for me, you know? However, I think if I would have been paired with Eric, we would have just nerded out all day. We would have been fine together, but I think Bert's a good match for me because he is chill. Because he will tell me to just shut up and eat a hamburger.
Yeah. One more quick one, and I'll do one more quick one, and then Brad could probably take over off of this. So basically, when I was the admin of the team back in the day, we had one applicant. I'm not going to say names, but I used to assign the coaches. Like, okay, I'm going to assign this coach, this person to this. So I assigned this athlete to Brad, and this guy, he emailed me back. I do not want to work with Brad. I do not. I want to work. I can't remember if he wanted to work with Berto or Eric, but he was just like really adamant. I do not want to work with Brad. And I don't know what he had in his mind about Brad, but I'm like, and on my end, I'm like, well, no, I'm not going to let this guy tell us how to distribute right now. So I'm like, I'm giving you to the person who is next in line rotation and who I think, according to the application, will fit well with this person. So I gave him to Brad. And I said, no, you're working with Brad. Either you work with Brad or, because he's 3DMJ, or you go to a different coach. And he finally said, okay, go to Brad. Long story short, I love Brad. This guy loves Brad to death. Loves him. So Brad did a freaking phenomenal job. And, basically I could just tell that this guy's perception of like what he's seen on social media, he was just like set on one person, or I can't remember who it was, but Brad ended up being the coach for him. So, and Brad, I think you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You can kind of elaborate on.
And we're still good friends to this day. Yeah, we're still good friends to this day.
Yeah.
When you were younger, either of y'all, well, we'll start with Brad. What are some times, it doesn't need to be specific either, it can be, but like, or a trend of things that you realize like, man, I was fucking that up when I was younger as a coach. My delivery was bad in this way, or do y'all have any of those? I can think of one from you, but.
Gosh.
Brad's like, I was just always a great coach.
There is. There's no doubt that there is. Now, certain circumstances, do I need to think about them? Yet nothing comes to mind, but at the same time, I can think of plenty of times that I've messed up. You know what I mean? But I mean, I think it just as a general term, I think, or not general term, but just kind of general in context when you think about Brad over the last 6 years as a coach. I think just the things that are available to us now that make coaching so much better, just doing the unlisted YouTube videos, really that was kind of Berto that started that with us. And I just remember the first time that he did that, he sent out a protocol and he says, okay, watch this first. And he put that link there. To me, that was just like, oh my gosh, that is genius. The first client that uploaded their protocol on G Drive, and it was like live, we could actually talk right there on their protocol. It was like, oh my gosh, that's genius, Yeah. And then of course, all the stuff that I've learned from Eric and from Jeff and from, Berto and now you, it's like, I wish I would have known all of those little things, way back when we very, very first started. And that's kind of like, I almost feel sorry, for those folks that we coached way, way, way back then. It's like, gosh, why didn't we have that available, now? So I guess that's kind of more general than what you were specifically asking for as far as, general delivery. Outside of context of what we're talking about here, I can tell you one thing that I really screwed up in coaching was with my son. And I've always been the kind of guy that's kind of like, I hold probably too high the opinion of others and what other people think.
Okay.
And I remember the very first year that Xander started playing football over in Reno, they wanted to try out for kickers. And so they had all the boys line up, and they're all going up there to kick the ball. And the coach said, okay, he says, you know what, if you know that you can't kick the ball, just don't even worry about putting yourself through this. And so Xander's in line, and I'm like, son, what are you doing? He's like, I'm going to try out for kicker. And I said, son, don't waste your time. Why are you even doing that?
Yeah.
Don't do that. And I will never forget. And it almost, oh gosh, it just makes me almost want to cry. He says, Dad, what's the harm in trying? And I was just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I felt terrible. And I was like, boy, Brad, you just really screwed up as a dad and a coach.
Aww.
And so, yeah, it's things like that to where it's like, gosh, just put your issues aside,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of think about your athlete, think about your son. And to this day, I apologize to him. I'm like, son, you were absolutely right. I messed up. That was a bad call there. You know? And then also, again, talking about my son, for me, math is easy.
Mm-hmm.
I numbers for me, when we used to play around the world when we were kids with the flashcards, I kicked everybody's butt. I was always the first one around.
Yeah.
Division, that's easy. It's backwards multiplication, And when we were homeschooling my son, I kind of realized why it is that really high-level athletes that are just natural, why they're such bad coaches. And that's not all of them, per se, keep in mind. I'm talking about just as kind of a majority of a type of a thing. It came naturally to them. They can't communicate what it is that they do that makes them so good, And that was a big struggle for me, trying to teach Xander, who is not a numbers person. He's terrible at math. It is a very foreign thing for him. That was hard. That was really hard for me to coach him to do something that was so easy for me and so natural for me. How do I put it into his language and help him understand that? And I can say that made me a better coach.
Yeah.
Because trying to figure out how to get the language of math and arithmetic into a language that he can understand, oh my gosh, that challenged me as a coach big time. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, just things that have helped you grow.
But I throw it out there. So
yeah, and I think you saying, said that he taught you a lesson or whatever, but it was in you considering that person. And I think with us, preferences are something that a lot of times can be worked in for no other reason than it makes the athlete happy. And if it's not going to hurt them, why the hell not? And I find that that's another, again, a thing I used to do when I was inexperienced. Like I remember, if we're talking delivery, like I guess one thing would be that I'm learning that, I think Bert mentioned this a couple months ago too in one of his check-ins. He was like, I just like that nowadays I'm making an effort to make my athletes happy. If they want to do extra arms, it's not going to kill them. Like I'll let them do extra, like I'll put it in their program. Yeah. So they're not doing shit behind my back that they don't want to do. Or that
it's okay to be a bro every now and then.
Yeah, well this is an ab thing. We talked about this in the powerlifting episode, is like, if it's going to make you feel better.
Abs are silly, right, Brad? Abs are silly.
But if it's going to make them feel better to have 2 exercises twice a week to put in their program, cool. Will it make more than a 1% difference maybe when they're on stage? Probably not. But if they feel better, fuck it, let them do it.
Yeah.
It's different than
motivated.
Yeah.
They're motivated. It makes them want to get to the gym and get after it more. Then yeah.
And that's different than if they. Yeah, it's different than if they said, I want to do squats 4 times a week. Well, that's fucking different because that interferes. But if it's, if it's something that's just because, then sure, why not? And the other thing that I remember when I used to be so angry about when I was a younger coach in gymnastics, I remember that there would be kids on occasion where, because I wasn't just, like, at first I was a rec coach, but not for very long. I coached team very early, competitive girls, and I would have this one athlete that had this one problem, and I would just grill him on it and grill him, day after day, week after week. We're trying to fix this thing. And one, I would get upset and be like, why aren't they getting it? Why aren't they getting it? Why aren't they getting it? They're not listening. They're not listening. They're not listening. When it very well could have been, hey, Andrea, why don't you fucking say it differently?
Yeah.
So that was one thing. And then I would get more pissed if, like, say I went out of town because I was coaching some other kids that had a meet. I come back and the substitute coach made them do it. And I'd be like, oh, this asshole. You know what I mean? When it's like, duh, they probably just said it differently. Or the kid wasn't already or the kid's probably in a shell expecting me to yell at them, thinking they're already going to do it wrong. And it was like, it took me so long, not only as a coach, but I mean, I probably didn't start figuring this out till my like later 20s or whatever, that looking inward and blaming myself and thinking how I could change it instead of always like, that fucking kid's not listening. When it's like,
look, yeah.
And that's not just a coaching thing. I realized, I didn't realize it then, and I'm sure it was over time, but now when I look back, it's like every relationship in my life is better because I'm actually considering that I have the power to make all those relationships better, and it wasn't, and if I don't like something that someone's giving me, could I maybe change their reaction to me? And that has helped me tremendously in like, shit, every area of life, but especially coaching. If someone shut off to me, I probably fucked something up along the way.
Yeah.
And if I didn't ruin it, I could probably improve it. Anyways.
I think often when we look externally, like we look at people and we go, oh, they're idiots. I'm not the idiot. I'm great. So a lot of times it's like you have to kind of look internally and see what you're doing. I'm not going to mention names, but there's one person, ex-family member, that got fired from a job. The boss was an idiot. The boss is an idiot. And then I was like, so you listen to that, you go, okay, maybe the boss is an idiot. Then another job, get fired again. Boss is an idiot. Boss is an idiot. I'm like, and I start to go, really? And then it happened for the third time. I'm like, no, you're the idiot. So you really, that person, you need to look internally to see what you're doing wrong.
Yeah, and that goes for not only us as coaches, right? Like if you're like, oh, my athletes are terrible, no one can stick to shit, blah, blah. It's like, well, maybe you're doing something wrong, And then athletes that are coach hopping, you're like, well, I was with this coach for 2 months and they didn't, and this coach helped me lose, but then it didn't happen. It's like, well, if no coach works for you, but they all have successful athletes elsewhere, like, come on,
It's a
bro.
red flag.
Yeah.
When we get applicants that they've had more than two coaches, it turns into, like, raises questions for me, like, okay, why am I now the third, fourth, or fifth coach?
Yeah.
So it kind of raises red flags. Not to say that every situation, like, it was that person's fault. Maybe there was a couple bad coaches.
Yeah.
But it does raise a red flag, like, okay, I need to really ask questions.
And I think too, when I talk about those old, like when I was a younger coach and stuff, it's that not always, but I would say probably more times than not, when I hit a roadblock with someone, it's because I'm pushing them too hard. Because that's my personality. Like I just because I like being pushed and shoved in the face, most people don't respond well to that. And I don't mean that literally like someone has to yell at me. Like I said, I'm a coach pleaser, always have been, but it might be something like, why are they binging? Why are they binging? Why didn't, I might not be feeding them enough, even though our goal is fat loss. Like, it doesn't do me any good if every other week they lose their shit. And where most coaches that are inexperienced are like, well, we need to cut your food now because you did that. And I'm like, now I'm of the MO that when someone, is having binge problems, I'm like, they'll be like, okay, but I'm ready now, really feel to take food. I'm like, no, we're actually adding food because until you can adhere for a few weeks at a time. And they, again, don't really like hearing that. And I'm like, it's not punishing you. It's just not beating you down further. Like, we have to stop the cycle at some point, and
Yeah.
Go isn't always the best thing.
Yeah, you can't coach everybody like yourself. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And like for me, it's like I can't coach everybody like me now at 45 years old with 30 years experience. I can't expect a 20-year-old who's only been training 2 years to have the calm and, just the poise that I have. You could try to teach them that, and you explain and try to get them to understand and the approach. But that takes time. So it's like, I can't, that's what I was talking about earlier. You have to put yourself in that person's shoes to fully get what they are experiencing. And so again, I think that experience is so huge in my opinion, because there's no way in hell, my first or second season, I was going to be able to coach a lot of different personalities.
Right.
Or certain levels of maybe their career and by like, if I'm a second year coach, how am I going to coach a guy that's been training for 30 years and have the knowledge and expertise to guide that person? Well, for me personally, I wouldn't have been ready to do that.
And when you say, remember how you were at 20 and 20, you don't necessarily mean as an athlete either. Like, how were you guys as people back then? Yeah. Like you were, like you said in your episode, like that you were closed-minded and stubborn and you knew it all and blah, blah, blah. Now, I would say, and then Brad, how were you at a younger age? Like what? But I couldn't imagine you any different. Were you like that?
Yes, I was. I can very vividly remember when I, first started the gym down the road. It was, it was kind of like my way or the highway. It's like, you don't understand. Science said this is what has to be done. You have to do it this way. You have to eat an hour after your training. Doing that. I can see Brad. Oh yeah, yeah. I remember it vividly, and I think back to those folks, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was such an idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah, remember Brad back in 2008, 2009 was an animal. Like his nickname was like, what did I nickname you again?
Naturally intense.
Actually, this dude got after it. It was an animal. So I could imagine him as a coach in 2008. He would have been like, Andrea, get after it. You need to do HIIT like 5 times a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would have been the guy that says, no, you can't do extra biceps. You must do your 3 sets, and when you fail, you're done.
Regardless of if you're a female, male, or any background, any age, you would have been doing that.
Yeah.
And I would have been the same way when I was following Dorian Yates' HIIT. Every time I brought someone to the gym, guess what they were doing?
Yeah.
HIIT. I was killing people, and I always think back like, oh God, those poor people. Like I remember this guy we were doing seated calf raises, and it was his first time training with me. I'm like, come on, we got to go to failure, and he's going to failure, and I'm like, 2 more, and he's like, he literally said it just like this too. He goes, I can't. I lost my shit. I'm like, what do you mean you can't? Let's go, and I made him do it.
Yeah. I still struggle with it too sometimes. Like, it's so weird to me too, like, how people still separate this from, like, you just talked about you coaching your son. And Jeff, I know I'm sure you learned a shit ton of lessons when you were a manager at the plant, or at the auto plant. And like me as a gymnastics coach, team leader, my bad. Team leader, but you were leading.
If I was a manager, I would have been rolling some money in, but yeah, no.
But I'm just so fucking, whoa, that came out. See, I'm really passionate about it. People thinking that the only way they will be a better coach and trainer is to get their CSCS, to take the course, those are all important and awesome. And I think, just people working on themselves will make them such a much better coach, and shit, some of the best books are, Phil Jackson, like you said, John Wooten, like it's basketball coaches, it's, Olympians. It's like we can, just because our sport's fairly new and very full of like testosterone and manliness and dumb shit, like that people don't think that they can learn this elsewhere. Like the experience that you talked about can, like, there's ways to fast track it to where it's faster than all of us learning. And luckily there's new programs, like SBS actually has a large component on coaching business and like mindset also, along with the like strength and nutrition and all that stuff. But I think just the biggest thing is taking responsibility and making yourself a better communicator and human with everyone. Because, like, again, your family relationships are all way better now, just like your coaching is getting better. And it would be very weird if that was, I don't think those could ever not get better at the same time. Like, learning to pay attention to people is awesome. Oh, my God. And someone asked me this at the SBS Academy. They're like, what are some good resources or things that you used to watch to get better at this? And other than my experience, I've gone through so many phases of like random obsession in what I consume content wise. And when I was first starting YouTube, it must have been like 2011 to 2013. I was in this like phase of learning from day game artists. Do you know what this means? Like real social dynamics, like day game, like how dudes pick up chicks. I was like obsessed for like a year watching.
I was married for 20 years and I'm married again, so I really didn't have a single life.
No, it started, so like there's Neil Strauss's The Game, which is, it's an old book. He doesn't write shit about it, but it's basically how to pick up girls. But it is like, in my mind, I'm like, how to work with humans. And it was
I didn't need that damn book anyway.
It was so useful. Not just that book, but I found it because there was this guy who's actually now, his name's Matthew Hussey, and I watched an entrepreneurship talk that he did somewhere I found on YouTube, right? And then that led to another talk of his that was at this thing called the Under 21 Convention, which is actually a young males conference. And so I liked his talk, and so I watched a few of the other talks. And then I was like, oh my God, these guys are all talking about banging chicks, but they're making a lot of sense. And so I spent a lot of time watching these videos, but it really is like, if you take away that it's a girl and you're trying to bang her, it's still important in the fact that listen to what she wants, see how she's acting, and just like responding to humans and just being more attractive as a human. Not necessarily... Again, a lot of them were kind of dirty, but some of them weren't. They were just like, if you want a good relationship, this is how you become more attractive as a human. And it made all of my relationship with my mom better, my relationship with the boyfriends, my relationship with my athletes, how I came across on YouTube, and I think that it would just do a lot of people that are just looking for, like, I want to be a better coach, so I'm going to go get that personal trainer certification. It's like, well, are you someone that people want to work with?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'll be honest with you. I think it was in 2011, during my prep, I read the Wooden Book like 2 or 3 times with all the cardio I was doing. Uh-huh. But I also watched, I'm not embarrassed to say, a ton of Oprah Winfrey, and I think she's freaking awesome, and I learned a ton off that show.
Yeah.
How to interact with people and just like all the different topics and different people she's had on there. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's one resource that I probably never mentioned before. I think I've like Facebooked it a while back, but that was one resource that I thought was pretty damn awesome.
Yeah. Oprah's the shit.
I'm sure it's on YouTube. All the old episodes, but yeah. I think you could learn more about bodybuilding than just through going through people of bodybuilding.
Absolutely.
That's why I like Wooden. It's like has nothing to do with bodybuilding at all. And he's a coach. So like for me, I don't gravitate to reading research stuff. I can't read research. It just bores me out my mind. Thank God we got Eric Helms. But I could pick up a Wooden book and just read the shit out of that. Because to me, I absorb that. And to me, that's like, that's coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I did
and
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Jeff and I had this great conversation last weekend when we were hanging out for the Muscle Mayhem about how nothing really everybody wants to fast track. What resource can I go to? Mm-hmm. What certification can I get? How can I get this 12-week transformation? Et cetera, et cetera. But really, when it comes to coaching, there's almost no replacement for just living life on this earth. You know what I mean? And it kind of, Jeff and I were talking about, it kind of makes sense why, when you think about like the most important, got the most responsibility person in the United States, it's like the president. You have to be a certain age before you can even consider running for the presidency.
Right.
And there's a lot of corporate companies where it's like, if you're going to apply for this position, you can't do it until you're 40, 45, 35 if you're, a younger exec. But it kind of, because you can have all of the initials after your name. You can have gone through all these certifications. You can have a doctorate in this degree, and you can have a doctorate in that degree. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you've lived life and seen all of the different experiences that have happened.
Right.
One of the things that I'm really loving right now is, you guys know I'm a Walking Dead fan. And an important character right now in The Walking Dead is this old guy named Herschel. And Herschel's not the leader, but Herschel is the oldest dude in the group, and Herschel's input means a lot to the leader. You know what I mean? And that's why I feel so fortunate to be in the group that we've got, is, we've got such a nice variety of experience and, the science. And, I mean, like I've said 100 times, Andrea, having your perspective and the way that you see things and the way that you view things is invaluable. It's invaluable to our group.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I completely agree that y'all's, your just time on Earth is definitely a huge factor to your value as a human. But at the same time, I also want to commend you guys in the fact that you guys have always worked on getting better. And there are plenty of old people that I'm like, you're really that angry still, or you're really that bitter, or you're still that naive, and vice versa. Like I said, even though, young people might not have as much experience, they can definitely fast track it. They can make decisions to put themselves in situations where they have to get better at this shit sooner. Throwing themselves in the deep end, however that may be, with their job or their profession or their hobby, or their own studies, And I think that I don't want y'all to sell yourself short and be like, well, I've been here a long time, so I'm good. Like, you guys work on it and you put yourselves, like you said, you watched Oprah, you read books, you having a son, like, I don't know what that's like, obviously, but there's things in life that make you level up, and to get there sooner, it's like, when we say studies, there's legit academic studies, and then there's, again, me watching fucking How to Pick Up Chicks and you on the cardio machine with Oprah. It's like, studying, you can study every day. Brandon's self-taught photographer, and he gets shit so much better year after year because I live with him, and he's watching and reading and watching and tinkering and reading and watching, and he's just constantly absorbing. And I think that, anyone who has that mindset of growth and that they can get better, always can, and it can always happen so much faster than the, I think it's Carol Dweck has a book called Mindset, and it's either like you're the fixed mindset or the growth mindset. And if you have growth and know that I might not be the best at this, but it's an area that I have the ability to get better at, versus whatever age, whether you're 20 or 50, being fixed and like, I know enough. So it's either bad in like, oh, I couldn't learn that, it's too hard, or it's bad in like, well, I got this, I know enough, I'm done. And that can be terrible in both ways,
Yeah, and sometimes it kind of worries me, because you're absolutely right, Andrea, in that I have met and encountered a ton of old veterans, that are just so close-minded. They have like, it's almost like no concept of sociability. You know what I mean? And it kind of worries me, when people are so focused on getting their certification and being in front of the computer and learning on YouTube and learning on all these different ways, but yet not getting out in the world and having human interaction. That's a good point. Sometimes that kind of worries me, and it's like, that's why I want you to kind of open up your horizons a little bit. Let's not think so much about this course, taking this test, being in front of this computer and looking at all these different electronic ways of learning. That's good. You got to have it there, and that's going to fast track. But by gosh, it's okay to just get out, and interact with people, and it's okay to talk on the phone. You don't have to text constantly.
Yeah.
I'm not calling you next week, Brad. I'm not doing the weekly phone calls. All right.
Don't worry,
but
I'll
I
be
think
calling
that is a good. that's a good point, and not just that. That brings us back to our fucking topic of delivery, right? So as much as I just said, like, how great it is to be absorbing everywhere, but until you see how your learnings work on other people, right? Like, until we've given the athlete those instructions that make them crumble, or those instructions that had them flourish, and seeing how they react to us. You know, if they have this personality, I delivered my message this way. Oh shit, that did not work. Okay, so next time I have an athlete that has that situation, now I know that going forth, you know? And like you said, that's not just with athletes, it's with Xander. It's with my friends. It's whatever. Like, if I want this reaction out of somebody, or this action out of somebody, will I get it better if I'm stern about it? Will I get it better if I just ask for it? Will I get it better if I passively try to get them to guess what I'm saying, which almost never works? But, yeah, that's a good point.
I think one more thing is that sometimes I don't want to change who I am either. Like, I don't want to, like, not be me because I'm trying to coddle a person or cater to maybe the way they. So I'm like, okay, that's where a judgment call comes. Like, maybe, because I had one athlete where I knew I was right. I just knew deep down I'm right, and I wasn't, and I kind of knew the athlete wouldn't be receptive to it now. Like, the situation was, I don't want to say exact specifics, but it was just this athlete was doing, not something to do with their protocols or anything. It was just like what they were doing out in social media land. It was just wrong.
Okay.
So I'm like, I'm just going to tell this person up front. I'm going to be brutally honest. And if this person doesn't like what I'm saying, they might get it 2 years from now, 3 years from now. This is a younger person too.
Right.
And the maturity level is really not that high. So I'm like, maybe this person will get it down the line. And if it means he fires me, I'm okay with it, because I think I'm doing him more good than harm right now. So that's what I did. I delivered like a 10-minute video and said exactly how I felt. I know it wasn't something he probably wanted to hear, and took it well in the first week or two, but then about a month later, he went his own way. So I'm not sure if that's why he went his own way, but I have a good feeling, suspicion that is.
Yeah.
So I kind of felt bad, but then at the same time, I'm like, I think it's going to pay off for this person in the end. So sometimes I'm just going to be me.
Yeah.
At times, even like, because we're talking about how we deliver things, sometimes I'm not just going to cater to someone because they're going to get butt hurt or they don't want to hear it. I'm going to just deliver it. But there's times where I'm like, okay, maybe I shouldn't say that right now anyways.
Yeah.
But that was like, that situation was going on for a little while. So I'm like, okay, it's time. So.
And how many people, Jeff, that you've done that with have come back to you like 2 or 3 years later and said, oh my gosh, I cannot, it all makes sense. Yeah. The light bulb has turned on, you know, and they're like, remember when you told me blah, 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 you were absolutely right.
It's happened. Yeah, but it's also happened like
all the time.
I hit the send button. I'm like, see what happened. And they respond the same day or the next day and say, thank you. I really needed that. I needed that wake-up call.
I've given a couple that I'm scared
of.
I got
that a lot. And so that gives me confidence knowing that it's okay to do that, you know?
Yeah.
But there's always the one where you're just like, it's probably not going to be received too well now. But later on in life, they might go, oh, yeah, that Jeff guy, he was right, you know?
Yeah.
Because I remember as a young person doing kind of things that were dumb, you know, whether it was my parents or, you know, someone who's older, experienced, telling me, you know, that's dumb. Why are you doing that? You shouldn't be doing this. Is what you should be doing. You know, you don't want to hear it at the time. And I could go back to my stepfather all as a teenager. You know, it's like, okay, thank you. You know, he's looking down on me going, I told you. So, I mean, if I didn't have him being hard ass on me growing up, the times I needed that stern discipline, I mean, who knows what kind of person I'd be now.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I'd be that dude working, you know, a $10 an hour job, just getting through life, and not really just being okay with it. So he's kind of taught me, like, you need to work, you need to get after it. And that's why he handed me that little rusty hatchet and said, here, I need you to chop down dig out this root. And it took me literally 6 hours to get through this thing. My hands were all blistered up. And I was like, don't you have a chainsaw? He's like, there's no chainsaw. You got to do with that. It was, I'm like, this guy's an ass, you know? So I'm hacking on this thing for 6 hours. I get through it, and he goes, now I taught you a lesson so you can think about getting an education, so you don't have to work hard. Taught me to work smart, basically. Yeah. So when you hear me say hashtag work smart, smart work, that's where that's coming from. Yeah. So sometimes, you just have to deliver. You have to deliver in a way that maybe is not going to be received too well, but in the end, it might be a good thing.
Yeah. So, in other words, like in the art of coaching, it was like, okay, we have to take in all these life contexts and all that stuff. But here, if we're talking about how we deliver, I mean, I think that the things that we said are important is like, obviously taking into account the end goal, right? Obviously taking into account that they need to make progress, taking into account their personality, but at the same time, like you just said, like not wavering in your beliefs or letting them necessarily run the situation when you know it needs to be different too. So it's like everything else.
So you're not being yourself. Like you still want to be you.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to change me for someone else because I'm going to baby that person or whatever.
Yeah. Because like you said, at the end of the day, you're hired to make them the best athlete they are, and if they're doing, whether it's in or out of right specifically to the sport, there could be shit they're doing outside their lives that's not benefiting them as an athlete or making it worse for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also the factor too is that maybe we aren't the right coach for that person, you know. So maybe it's like I'm fired for good reasons, and that's happened too, where I've been fired a couple of times. It's just because it wasn't a good fit.
Yeah.
You know, and that to me, it's like it doesn't bother me too much because we're all human. We all have different personalities. Sometimes we're just not going to gel.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times. Go ahead.
Or even 3DMJ. Some people just don't really kind of go with our message, and they might say, you know what, this really isn't for me, and they move on.
And a lot of times too, I feel like people think they're ready to take on a prep, and they realize halfway through it, like, this is too much. Whether it's their first or their third or fifth or whatever, sometimes shit just happens. And I think something that's hard too, like in delivery, is one, obviously don't be an asshole that doesn't consider the person. Obviously don't lose yourself, but at the same time understand that no matter what you do, if shit doesn't work out, maybe your delivery was fucked up, but maybe it's just not their time. And that's hard to deal with too. Like I was scared to do that, you know, to make that one last final call that was like an effort to save them, but it ends up repelling them, and now either they needed a different coach or they need to not undergo this thing, or maybe this isn't the season. Maybe because of this. Yeah. I've had that happen, honestly, more times than I thought I would, where they want to compete this year, and it's getting to the end, and it's like, this isn't a good idea. We have to wait.
Yeah. Because, I got one thing I want to mention that it's probably it could be a great podcast probably, but just I think what I'm seeing with like all the different coaches out there, like there's a lot of great coaches, and I think there's great coaches for certain levels. And I think that's really not ever talked about. Like when you think of like, okay, a great high school football coach, a great college football coach, a great pro football coach, maybe that pro football coach can't coach high school kids because they can't deliver. But in bodybuilding, you don't see that. Like, you know, there's a great coaches out there, and, you know, you might see some who are coaching really high level athletes. Maybe that, you know, they're great at high level athletes, but then maybe they can't relate well to a first timer. So I think there's, you know, when we're talking coaching, I think that's kind of I haven't seen it yet out there.
That's a good point.
Because I can coach like first timers really good because I have a lot of experience and excuse me. Bless you.
Pardon me.
Bless you. So I think it's just when I coach first timers, because of my experience, because of my compassion and all, I can relate well and guide them really well. Mm-hmm. But I also feel like, okay, the advanced elite guys, I can do the same. So I think it's just, not to toot my own horn, but I just feel like I can. But I think there's different levels of coaches out there, and it's just not talked about.
That's a really great fucking point. Yeah, that's true. And I think that, you know, now that you bring that up, I've had a couple of pros come to me and I can feel myself being like, oh shit, I really got to do a good job. You know, whereas like a first timer, I'm like, oh, no matter what, I got you. And then when it is a pro that comes to me, I'm like, all right, Andrea, you know, like I have to pep myself up. And I know over time I'll be where you are.
you're fearful you're going to mess them up.
Yeah, because they've already achieved all
they're
this.
already good.
Yeah.
But see, from my experience, they're much easier to work with because they're experienced.
And what's funny too is like of the 2-3 people that I've worked with that are already pros and did it on their one of them, it was like whoever, I don't want to throw no names, but like there's things that had to be done to get her to that level that I was like, oh my God, like she was damaged. You know what I mean? Not in like mentally, it was in order for her to get there, it took them breaking her as a human. And it was like our job together, which again is my bread and butter, and which I love, of like getting her mindset right and helping her do this in a way that, you know, is a positive thing to her life, and not, okay, now I'm a pro figure athlete, but I have no personality or loved ones anymore, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's another podcast too, because it's like on the elite level, getting to elite level conditioning, you got to break people at majority of the time.
Yeah, but I also, in this particular situation, is like, we don't know how to off season, which I've been there, you know. I find, you know, a lot, I'm almost comforted in the fact that, like, oh, I'm not the only one that struggles way more in the off season than in season.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, an important message to deliver too, is like the recovery diet video. I find such a great tool for us because it does summarize, and it's so easy to at least give them that first taste of, we are going to gain weight and this is why. And I like giving that out like 4 weeks before they're going to start gaining that weight. So it's like, we talked about this. Okay, it's about to happen. You know, how are we dealing with it and all that stuff. But
yeah. And you know, one thing too that I just wanted to add, kind of in addition to, but kind of somewhat separately, I think probably the biggest regret that I have on some of my coaching endeavors and experiences is when I was coaching something that I was familiar with and that I knew about, but I had not lived it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The very first couple years that I coached Pop Warner football, my team was terrible, you know. And I mean, sure, it's a small town. The kids that I had, they weren't, you know, all that talented. But I think about it, you know, when I played football, I, for the most part, was one position and like second string. And here I am trying to teach all these kids, all these different, you know, skills and all these different positions when I had never done it, you know. Well, it's no wonder that my team stunk, you know. Look at their coach, you know. Yeah. And so I think back to that, and then I think about, you know, people that are in our industry that are coaching that are making the mistake, in my opinion, of doing what I did there, of trying to teach a kid to block when I never blocked. Yeah. You know what I mean? How can you teach a person to peak for a powerlifting competition when you've never peaked? You may have seen it, you may have the numbers, you may have understand that, but you've never felt it. You know what I mean? How do you teach a person to get by on, you know, 6-7 calories per pound for the course of like 3 weeks when you've never done it? Yeah. You know, when you've never done that and you've never experienced it, you know, and you've never lived it. Jeff knows what it feels like to be flipping lean and have no body fat. Mm-hmm. How can you expect a person to, you know how that feels? You know what I mean? And so that's kind of one thing where I feel really comfortable with the group that I'm in, because we've got such a nice diverse group. You know, we've got people that know what it feels like to be uber lean. We've got a person that knows what it feels like to lose their shit when they're gaining weight and they can't do anything about it. Mm-hmm. You know, we know what it feels like for a really high level athlete, you know, to get to the world stage and have the desire to want more. You know, we've got this awesome group that, you know, I hate to toot our own horn, but at the same time, you have to be aware. You have to be aware of who it is that you're entrusting all of your goals, motivations, and really your almost your livelihood too, in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can I say a story?
Of
I got
course.
stories.
I like your
when
stories.
I was working at the auto plant, when I was a team leader at the auto plant, what I saw, like being on the line, like not being a team leader prior to being a team leader, that the team leaders we had, a lot of them were lazy. They would like rely on the next team leader to do the work, and it just was like a trickle down effect. So it was just a lot of laziness. People weren't really having good work ethic. A lot of the group leaders were kind of the same. Like every now you have a good leader, would have good groups because of that. But when the leadership was really not too good, the workers, it sucked. The morale sucked.
Yeah.
And when I became a team leader, like I'm going to lead these people and I'm going to lead by example.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to talk too much. I'm just going to work. And that's what I did. I worked. Like whenever people had issues, we used to you have to pull the cord and all that. I'd come and answer the calls. I was like this, no matter what. I wouldn't say, hey, I'm going to let this next team leader go. I'm just going to walk right past him and answer the bell. And I kid you not, the group leader was out after probably about 6 months on the job. The group leader was out, and actually I was in charge of the group for a week. So I had to do the morning meetings. And usually when we do morning meetings before the line starts up, the group leader would start talking. Everybody would be talking over them and not really paying attention. As soon as I led that first meeting, I said, okay, guys, I need you to listen up. They all took one step closer to me.
Yeah.
So it was just the way I was leading by example, not trying to get away with shit. And so I think that has a huge impact when we're out there as athletes doing what we're doing, and the work ethic and the drive, I think it reflects. And I think that's, as a coach, it kind of helps us because people know that we have that work ethic and they want to work.
Yeah.
So to me, it's really important that we lead by example.
That's a great example of delivery that's not direct. Like that's indirect. They've seen us all prep on YouTube. So it's like, even though we're not telling them, hi, nice to meet you, I'm your coach. By the way, I did all these shows and and I prep this way. It's like pretty much if they found 3DMJ, they know that we've all, like you said, done what it takes. We've been there. They've seen it. It's public. We still, are active on the internet in our own ways with, we're doing this podcast where we talk about our athletes or whatever. So I think, again, going back to if I was a new coach listening to this, it's like, do you just have a website that says I'm a coach? Or do you have a website and maybe informative video series or blog or Instagram account or are you writing something like basically, the whole like that. If you don't have a whole shit ton of clients yet, there are still ways to practice delivering your message and doing it publicly and not maybe directly, at least is giving you some social proof that you know what you're talking about, that they can trust you, that other people in the industry trust you. So, like, again, me reaching out to see if I could get a 3D coach, like before that, I'd written tons of shit about y'all, made tons of videos about you guys. So Bert already knew who I was when, I had a friend who was one of his athletes ask for me, so it's like you said, just all of the people underneath you as you were a leader immediately were like, oh, we know Jeff's the real deal. Let's listen to him. He works as hard as we do, if not harder, and I think that in this context with new coaches, it's like, if you don't have a full roster of clients yet, how can you prove to people that you're worthy?
Yeah. That's like the first day as I was a team leader, I wasn't telling people what to do, Oh, I'm a team leader, so now I have the authority and I'm going to tell you what to do. And it was like, no, I just stayed quiet and I just started working, and that was it. And, basically I would, if my team needed anything from me, I was there. Yeah. And that was just it. It's like I built up that trust over time. Yeah. And and it just spoke volumes of the action. So I think if it's like if I started coaching as a bodybuilder and I didn't have nothing to back, and I think it's important like to have those degrees and all that gives you some credibility to start, but you still have to take everything that you've learned and apply it. Yeah. And in a nice practical way.
Yeah.
Because I don't care how many degrees you have. Because my wife's a teacher. I've been around a lot of people with degrees, and I'm like, are you freaking serious? You got a PhD in what?
Yeah.
It sure isn't common sense.
Yeah.
I have a high school degree,
Yeah,
and I
and
got a ton more common sense than this person.
And that's the thing that scares me about people that bury themselves, you know, in electronic certifications.
Yeah.
You know, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Well,
you know,
even in
this guy
school.
comes over and programs my computer, but he can't open my door. He's like, how do I open the door? You know,
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah, I think you want to get book smart. Like you want to get book smart. Like if I could go back in time, I really wish I would have been more book smart. And if I had the book smart along with the experience level I got now, I mean that's
exactly. That's
crazy. So it took me many, many moons to get to where I am now through life experience. But I probably, like Andrew was saying, I could have fast tracked that. So I think a combination of both. So you do need to establish credibility, but don't get a degree and then expect you're going to have, you know, all these people looking up to you going, oh, because you got a degree after your name. You're not God. You know, still need to get after and work after that.
And that's
now it's kind of like when I got the team leader position. It's like, okay, now I got the little title after my name, team leader, but I got to do something with it. I got to work. And that's the same thing when I got a pro card. It's like I got a pro card, big deal. Now I got to get in there in the pros and mingle with sharks.
What Brad said about how not just the online degrees, but even in person in school, you spend 90% of your time listening. And I think what you said is right. Like it's not just being able to make the scientific, like in your brain, best adjustment. It's, again, if we're talking about the delivery, are you practicing that in the real world? And not just with athletes. Like I said, even writing a blog or again, making videos is delivering your message. And that's at least a small scale better than just absorbing forever. And then then you have, oh shit, someone wants to hire me. Let me practice my delivery with this one person. You guys started, I know, with 2 sponsored athletes, which was free, right? Just, you know, and that's how you practice your delivery there. And just over time it accumulates. And I think that's a good thing to end with is like, you can't always be taking in. We have to be putting out. And then it's your job not only to put out as practice, but to follow up and see what the response is, whether that's listening to viewers and readers or listening to an athlete or seeing their behavior. So, yeah, this was a fun one, y'all. Anything else? Good way to end? Yeah?
Yeah, because I almost drank all my diet soda and I got to go to the bathroom, so it's a great
All right, guys. Well, thank you all for joining me, and we'll see you all again next week.